Perfect. Okay, today my guest is Professor Mauro Guillén. I will keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Mauro as a person, Professor Guillén is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I'll skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. And I should actually say, Dean Guillén, congratulations. I understand you're going to Cambridge as the new dean. Professor Guillén is a trustee of the Royal Foundation of Spain, a member of the AFI School of Finance, and serves on advisory groups at the World Economic Forum. He is a Guggenheim Fellow and a Fellow of the Macro Organizational Behavior Society. He served as the director of the Lauder Institute of Management and International Studies at Wharton. In addition to many teaching and service awards, he was a finalist in the Carolyn Dexter Best International Paper Award at AOM in 2007, won the Richard Scott Best Paper Award, the Best Paper Award from the Comparative and Historical Sociology area, and was a finalist for the Best Dissertation Award from American Sociological Association. He received Gustavus Myers Award for Outstanding Book on Human Rights in '91, and he frequently comments in NPR, Bloomberg TV, CBS News Radio, among others. Thank you, Mauro, for making time for us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
First question, what did you want to become when you were a child?
What would I do when I retire?
No, when you were a child, what did you want to become?
Oh, when I was a child. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. When I was a child, I don't think I had like a very specific idea as to what I wanted to be. So I'm talking about when I was 7 or 8 or 10 years old. But I thought of myself as somebody who would like to travel, that's for sure. And somebody who would like to learn about other cultures. So I didn't really find my calling, which was to become an academic, until I was in college. And I was probably age 20 or so when I realized that being a scholar was what I wanted to do in life.
Well, you started it. So what do you want to be? What do you want to do when you retire?
Well, I don't think I'm going to retire. In fact, my argument, as you know, is that we need to rethink retirement, especially retirement at age 65, because I think now people are young when they turn 65, unlike, several generations ago, because people stay in much better physical and mental shape. But since you asked me the question, I should answer it. What I would like to do is perhaps to have more time to devote to just thinking about issues, writing about them, perhaps without having to do academic administration or having to do teaching, which, as you know, is something that takes up a lot of time and energy. So I think in my retirement, I would like to just have more time to think, to read, and to write, which is what I enjoy the most.
Perfect. Something that is not on your CV, something that not many people would know about you.
Well, one of my biggest hobbies, which I don't think is listed on my CV, is to go time and again to the same restaurants in different parts of the world. I love doing that. So some people prefer to explore new restaurants. I love going to the same places so that they get to know you. And when you go there, the people there know exactly how you want something cooked. So for me, gastronomy is just a very important part of life. And especially if it involves a social element, meaning that you go out with a friend or with a family member to have dinner or to have lunch. So that's something that is not listed on my CV, but that I really enjoy doing.
Interesting. Top 3 restaurants of all time for you.
Well, top 3 culinary experiences. Let me put it that way. Okay. Number 1, Japan, Tokyo, at the fish market. 3 a.m. in the morning. I went there in the year 1994, and it was the best culinary experience I've ever had. They were bringing in, the tuna directly from the boats, and they would cut it, and you would eat it right there next to the boats. So that was number 1. Okay. Number 2, I would say there's a restaurant in Madrid, which is from northern Spain. It's called La Manduca, and everything is fresh, a lot of vegetables, but also good fish. It's a fantastic, top-notch restaurant. And then I think I would mention one in London. I don't know whether it's still open or not because of the pandemic, but it's called the Pollen Street Social. That's the name of the restaurant. It's very near Regent's Street and Piccadilly Circus, and it's a fantastic restaurant. It's just so good. So I think those would be my three, top places to go to.
Perfect. Regrets? Have you got any?
I think I don't like having regrets. Meaning that I think it's better to think about life looking towards the future. However, what I would say is that perhaps my biggest regret is not to have written 2030, the book, a little bit earlier. And I say this because I think it was already obvious by 2010 that the world was changing very quickly. And it took me another 10 years until 2020 to write a book such as that. So that's a big regret that I have. I should have written that book maybe 5 years earlier than I did.
Well, it's a bestseller, 2030.
Yeah, I'm not complaining, but again, I mean, since you asked me any regrets, I think that would be a big regret.
What was the best reaction you got about that book? Who gave you the best feedback, most positive, most interesting feedback?
Well, to tell you the truth, I'll tell you a story that I think you're going to like. So over the last few months, from my basement in Philadelphia, which is where I'm speaking from right now, I've been doing a lot of webinars about the book. And the one that really opened my eyes to what the next book might be was a webinar that I did where I presented the ideas in the book. But the audience was an audience that I had never addressed before. And I bet you that you have never addressed that kind of an audience either. It was the directors of zoos in the United States, zoological gardens, right? And it was fascinating. They were telling me about their challenges. And I was telling them about the future and what's going to happen. More grandparents and grandchildren and technology and all of that. And we just had such a great conversation about a topic that is, I think, maybe going to become the next subject of my book, which is how generations relate to one another, right? Because as you know, we have quite a few tensions these days in the world. Millennials are blaming the baby boomers for climate change. They're blaming them for the global financial crisis and so on and so forth. And of course, the baby boomers who are into retirement here in the United States, they need millennials to pay taxes because otherwise they cannot claim their pensions and their healthcare. So that was a fantastic session, and it really opened my eyes to something that I had not seen before.
Perfect. So let's just talk about research segments for a while. My classic question in this segment is, if you're stranded in a small village, locals don't know who you are, how do you explain your research to people who don't read your work regularly, and why is it important? So you're basically giving an example with your book, right?
Yeah.
So
I think the way I would put it is, I'm somebody who likes to connect the dots. So I look at things that are seemingly unrelated, right? So demographics, technology, the economy, something that goes on in some part of the world. And I look for the connections. I look for the ways in which those things come together to create something that didn't exist before. So that's the way I would describe myself to people. It's like, I'm the guy who knows a little bit about a lot of things, as opposed to a lot about just a few things. And what I like to do is to connect the dots.
Interesting. In IB, International Business, what are some of the things that we have understudied, or what is the next big question in IB?
I think the next big question will be around two issues. One is, I think we're going to go into another round of offshoring in the world. Let me explain. I think the experience that we've had over the last 12 years with remote work will, I think, encourage companies and also some people to look for ways to work remotely as opposed to going back to the office. And this, I think, opens up, a new universe of possibilities for companies to hire people on a permanent basis who are going to be located halfway around the world and who can work for the company remotely, using one of the platforms that exists. I think that's one big issue. I think the other big issue is going to be inequality, quite frankly. So in other words, how is foreign investment, how is foreign trade, how are all of these phenomena that we study in the field of international business, how are they related to this very big problem that, as you know, we have in the world, which is rising inequality, economic inequality in particular. So I think those are going to be really hot topics in the next few years in the field of international business.
Can I ask you something about Belt and Road, the Chinese Belt and Road? How do you see that thing having an impact over the next maybe 5 to 10 years?
So you mean the Chinese economy as a big investor in the rest of the world?
No, is their big initiative for Belt and
Road. The
Road.
Belt and Road, yeah. So big investments in infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Well, look, China, as you know, in addition to exporting gadgets that they make, they're also a big exporter of capital. And over the last 30 years, they've been exporting capital primarily to the United States, buying debt. But that's going to come to an end sooner or later. And so now they are deploying the capital that they have, because, as you know, it's a high savings country, in ways that I think advance their agenda as a future global power. And of course, they're investing, as you know, heavily in Central Asia, in the Middle East, in Africa, also in Europe. And I think they're essentially laying the groundwork so that some of those markets that are not very developed yet, like Central Europe, Central Asia, or Africa, become big consumer markets. As you know, they have expanding populations, and all they need is infrastructure. All they need is the emergence of a middle class. So I think that China's initiative, Belt and Road, is essentially about creating new consumer markets in the world where Chinese companies can be active. And so it's a strategy that makes a lot of sense, actually, when you think about it. Because once again, China has a surplus of capital, and it's a very good idea. Instead of investing it in US government bonds, right, treasuries, it's perhaps better to invest in economic development in some parts of the world that eventually can become major markets for Chinese companies.
How is that going to impact inequality?
Well, I think inequality is something that is driven by so many different factors. Some of them are domestic in nature, you know, the nature of the political regime, whether there's corruption, how much access there is to the educational sector. But there's also international or global sources of inequality. One of them, of course, is free trade, right? Another one is investment, especially, let me point this out, short-term or portfolio investment. Because as you know, what happens is that when portfolio investment arrives in emerging markets, they don't have fully developed financial markets. So therefore, only a few companies, only a few individuals benefit from those portfolio inflows. So that generates inequality. And then the other issue is that when there's a crisis, or there's the threat that there might be a crisis, and this is also very well documented, as you know, portfolio capital tends to exit the country, right? Because portfolio capital responds very quickly to any signal about uncertainty. And so when that happens, that tends to hurt the poor more than the rich, okay? Because it can have the effect of creating a financial crisis. And we know from experience, from history, that the poor suffer more from financial crisis than the rich. So I think there are so many aspects to the growth of inequality around the world, but certainly phenomena associated with international business have a lot to do with it.
About the culture of IB scholars and how it evolved over time. What was it like before? What is it going to be?
Yeah, so as you know, I have written about culture and how to measure it and how to measure cultural distance in the world. You know, the person who really made a splash, made a big contribution, was Gerd Hofstede, if you remember, the Dutch psychologist, with all of his research about cultural distance and cultural dimensions in the world. I have tried to contribute to that literature by shifting the attention towards institutions, right? And also thinking about the different dimensions. So we have political institutions, we have economic institutions, we have technology, we have administrative institutions, regulatory institutions, and a long list of them. So I think it is eminently a multidimensional problem. As you know, Hofstede came up with only 4 dimensions, and one always wonders why those 4 and not any others. So I think, we will continue to see much research in the field focusing on cross-national culture, because you see, no matter how much globalization advances, we're still seeing that national cultures and even subnational cultures survive and they become influential. And we still see that companies are organized in different ways, that workers behave in different ways, following patterns of national culture and subnational culture in some cases around the world. So I think this is the kind of phenomenon that is never going to go away. I think that is going to keep international business scholars busy for a very long time.
In the next 5 to 10 years, do you see an increase in globalization or nationalism?
Well, of course I do. As you know, I'm a scholar of globalization. Some people say that this pandemic represents the end of globalization, and I think they're crazy. Why do I say that? Well, I say that because, economic globalization will continue. I mean, the advantages of organizing production on a global scale, taking advantage of all of the differences that exist in the world, is just so powerful that I don't think any government, I don't think any pandemic can actually slow that down. And then we have, I think the best argument for the continuation of globalization, which is technology, the adoption of technology. Like, for example, the technology that you and I are using right now to tape this interview, you, I'm sure, and I have been using to teach our students. But using this technology as opposed to being in the classroom enables us to bring in, for example, guest speakers from all over the world. It enables us perhaps even to teach a class together, although we are not located in the same place. It would enable students from different parts of the world to take a class together. All of those are manifestations of globalization. Now, you can also apply this same reasoning to many other areas in which technology is making a difference. Think about e-commerce. Think about the use of technology platforms for leisure and entertainment. Think about how also companies are going to, transform themselves by using technology, eliminating certain kinds of jobs by creating other kinds of jobs as well. So specifically, I'm thinking, for example, about the blockchain and about artificial intelligence, of course. So I believe that for all of these reasons, the process of globalization will continue. I don't think the pandemic is about to bring globalization to an end, not at all.
Okay. Third segment about advice and mentoring. What was the best advice you received when you were going through the program, PhD program?
I think the best advice that I got was always work on topics that fascinate you, that you feel passionate about. So never be practical or pragmatic about it. So study something that you really care about. Because if you don't, then you're going to develop an instrumental approach to it. And you're going to try to finish, that research project as quickly as possible. However, if you feel passionate about the topic, then you're going to do a much better job. You're going to devote all of your energies to it until you get it right. So I think that was the best piece of advice that I got. So, for example, one practical implication is I never think about whether what I'm about to do research on is something that can be published. I actually believe that that's putting the cart ahead of the horse. What you need to do is to work on research and do it so well that then, because of its high quality, it will get published. You see what I'm saying? So I think when people think about, I'm going to do research on this because it's a topic that is becoming very popular, and therefore it might be easy to publish something in the journals. But if it's a popular topic, then there's a lot of people actually writing about it, doing research on it. So I believe that the sequence is the opposite. That is to say, first start by producing high quality research, and then publication will follow if it indeed is high quality research.
I mean, I would normally ask what are the top 3 big mistakes that PhD students make, but you're basically covering it with this thing. Who was your advisor?
My advisor was Charles Perrow, who was an organizational theorist. He was famous for studying the structure of organizations. And, he made a big impact on me because essentially he taught me how to ask great questions. And let me make a point about this, because you were asking me about advice from the PhD program. You see, I think really what is important in terms of becoming a good researcher is to ask questions that are important and relevant. Let me exemplify this by something that Pablo Picasso, the famous painter, once said in the 1960s, okay? So Pablo Picasso once said, quote, "Computers are useless. They can only give you answers," unquote. That's what he said. And when you think about it, it's a very profound, statement, because it's easy to, come up with solutions. What is really hard is to ask relevant questions, especially in social science, especially in management, especially in international business. So that's why I believe that PhD programs, above anything else, should prepare future scholars in terms of understanding the literature and understanding where the gaps are, where the problems are with existing theories. And in so doing, then, PhD students will be able to formulate important questions. And then they will just use the methodologies available to us to try to propose an answer to those questions.
Beautiful. Well, Mauro, last question. What is one question that I should have asked but haven't?
I think the question that maybe I would have asked is, how does one think about a career in academia? Because as you know, most people produce their best work in the first 10 or 15 years of their careers. And then, they just languish for another 50 years, right? And I think, it's really important to think about our careers as scholars as a series of reinventions. I think we need to reinvent ourselves. So obviously, we only get a PhD once, right? But then within 10 years or 15 years, we are outdated. What we learn becomes obsolete because, new methodologies have been produced, theories continue to advance. And no doubt, as scholars, we also need to teach, we need to evaluate other people. So we have less time than young people to devote to research, right? As we mature in our careers. So what I would say is that I think it's really important to reinvent oneself. So I think it's important to migrate from one set of questions to another set of questions every 10 years or so. And in so doing, I think then we can remain young as scholars. So I think that would be the question that I would have asked. How do you think about a scholarly career that can last for 50 years or 60 years, right? When we only go to graduate school to get our PhD once in our mid to late 20s, right?
Perfect. I learned a lot. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you.
Thank you. I also learned from your questions. So thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Thanks.